Welcome to this Aztlander presentation, Making History Through Community Archaeology in Chiapas, Mexico, with Christopher Hernández. Enjoy!
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jim, for the invitation and for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for tuning in to my talk titled Making History Through Community Archaeology in Chiapas, Mexico. So over the past decade, history has increasingly come under public scrutiny, especially in terms of politics and factional competition in the US. Culture wars fuel the clash over what is true, factually accurate, and actual history. And in this vein, monuments and textbooks have become flashpoints for arguing about the erasure and retelling of official histories. And some of these clashes have led to actual riots. And across the US, you also have various state governments passing laws to more tightly restrict what is accepted as historical fact and taught at schools. Yet, lost in most of these public debates is the central question of what is history? I mean, history can mean many different things, but I focus on two important ideas developed by Michel Rolfe-Trouillot. And so history is both what happened and what is said to have happened. And acknowledging the latter component is of vital importance. The problem with history is that most of us will never get to experience what happened. Instead, we must rely on the experiences of others and what they tell us about human history. Thus, the historical process is inherently subjective. And it is the making or the process of telling what has happened that is the focus of my talk. And as I already highlighted, this is not a mere thought experiment. History implicates a wide web of power relations that have very real consequences for people today and into the future. And before I really dive into my talk, but sticking to the themes of history and power, I want to acknowledge that the city of Chicago sits on the traditional homeland of the Potawatomi, Odawa, Ojibwe, Peoria, Kaskaskia, Miamia, Wea, Sauk, Meskwaki, and Ho-Chunk peoples. The city remains a contested land in which the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, per the 1833 Treaty of Chicago, continue to claim legal right over lands east of Michigan Avenue. And to support Native American sovereignty, self-determination, and education, please consider donating to the American Indian College Fund. You simply have to type in collegefund.org to do so. So today, I will discuss how community archaeology contributes to the history-making process. Next, I will discuss Mexico as a case study for thinking about how indigeneity is appropriated by nationalism, and at the same time, contemporary indigenous descendants are treated poorly. Then I will get into the Mensäbäk Archaeological Project, and I will focus on work I did in 2018 and 2019. So first is a pilot project that focused on consolidating an archaeological structure to create a site more appealing to tourists. And second is a collaboration in which we implemented consent procedures in the process of aerial lidar mapping. Last, I'll provide some conclusions on how community archaeology contributes to the history-making process. Telling or making history is a reflexive process. Through reflection that is informed by prior experiences, culture, and relations of various sorts, people create narratives about where we have been, what we have done, and who we are. History is always told from a particular perspective or perspectives. And if you're interested in truth or fact, I would argue that history can at best approximate with a high degree of certainty what actually happened in the past. But a historian can never fully escape bias, erasure, and silences. After all, it is impossible to tell all the facts in a day, let alone across a year, decade, or century. Every historian must pick and choose what information to provide and emphasize in their telling of the human experience. As history makers, archaeologists often pride themselves on being able to go beyond written records to address silences and erasures. And whereas this traditional point of pride focuses on generating findings with societal impact, community archaeologists emphasize how doing archaeology impacts a diversity of stakeholders, namely local and descendant groups. By transforming archaeology through collaborative practice, the aim is to promote social justice. And as I will demonstrate in this talk, community archaeology challenges us to rethink the archaeological process in profound ways. And as Jim already mentioned, I do research in Latin America, primarily in Chiapas, Mexico. For over 10 years, I've collaborated with Hachihuinic, who are also known as Lacandon Mayas, but they don't call themselves that. They call themselves Hachihuinic, so that's the autonym that I'll use. And so we work together as part of the Mensäbäk Archaeological Project, and doing archaeology with indigenous peoples in Mexico is of vital importance because contemporary descendants are treated as second-class citizens while the nation claims indigeneity as its heritage. Mexican nationalism is focused on the idea of mestizaje, or the blending of two distinct groups. Octavio Paz famously argued that Mexicans are a formerly colonized group born of the violence wrought by Spaniards on indigenous peoples. And this is encapsulated in the figures of Hernan Cortés, Malinali, also known as La Malinche, and their child, who is the supposed first mestizo. So Mexicans are not Spanish or European, and they're a mix of Spanish and indigenous peoples, thus making the nation itself distinct from its former colonial overlords. As part of mestizaje, the roots of the nation lie in the remains of ancestral civilizations such as the Aztecs and Mayas. And for examples of this, you can look at the history of Mexico murals by Diego Rivera at the National Palace, the national flag, or even one version of the national soccer team jersey from the last World Cup. You know, the Aztecs are everywhere in Mexico City and in sort of Mexican nationalism. Despite the nationalist celebration of indigeneity, contemporary indigenous peoples are treated poorly in Mexico. For a widely publicized example, we can look at the racist treatment of Yalitza Aparicio, who is an Oscar-nominated actress and indigenous. While earning fame for her role in the film Roma, members of the Mexican media leveled many criticisms against her, including that she was, quote unquote, not traditionally beautiful. And this was racist code for her being dark-skinned and indigenous. And in a bit of a side note, Natasha Varner has written a book called La Raza Cosmética, which is a fascinating argument on how whiteness is an ongoing form of colonial oppression that defines beauty and indigeneity in Mexico. The racialized hierarchies set up by colonizers live on in other ways, such as the poor economic conditions in which most indigenous peoples live. The Mexican nation state generates billions in revenue from tourism associated with archaeological sites and indigenous cultures. The Maya Riviera is the most famous example, but there are others, such as Palenque in Chiapas, which you see on the screen. However, as I mentioned earlier, most indigenous descendants live in poverty and see very little of the economic benefits generated via their ancestral remains. So there exists a major contradiction. Mexican nationalism celebrates certain aspects of the indigenous past and appropriates it as national heritage. So the nationalist emphasis is on pre-Columbian sedentary societies, namely the Aztecs and Mayas, and you can throw in Teotihuacan and other groups as well. And although nationalism celebrates these pre-Columbian societies, contemporary descendants are treated as second-class citizens and an inferior race. So how can this make sense? The justification is that contemporary Mayas and other indigenous descendants are not the same as those in the past. Those great civilizations supposedly degenerated into inferior peoples that exist today. Or if you're into the History Channel, you might say that it was aliens who made the Mesoamericans great. And so because the aliens left, Mesoamericans are no longer great. And this myth of degeneration is one of the reasons you will not hear me refer to the time period before Spanish colonization in Mesoamerica as post-classic. Instead, for this talk, I will refer to the time period between 8900 and the Spanish encounter as the pre-colonial period. The darker side of Mexican nationalism, and there is a growing literature on this topic, is that ultimately it promotes and conserves a very narrow Eurocentric conception of indigeneity. Mexican nationalism celebrates caricatures of indigenous peoples with an emphasis on folklore, spirituality, and places them in the past, hence the common label of traditional peoples. This past tense rendering facilitates the narrative of a disappearing native and the need for white saviorism to salvage their culture. Mestizaje ultimately seeks to eliminate living indigenous descendants. And I realize that my talk has wide implications because many Mexicans feel pride in their claims of Aztec heritage. I mean, here in Chicago, you could see all the Mexican flags flying out of trucks last week because of Independence Day. But mestizaje is a logic of elimination. And when I say logic of elimination, I'm referring to the work of Patrick Wolfe and settler colonial theory. Mexican nationalism deploys mestizaje to create a singular, hegemonic Mexican identity. In this context, contemporary indigenous peoples are relegated to the past, which ultimately means they are problems or detrimental to national progress and modernization. This same assimilative pressure is currently being experienced by the Hachihuinic, which I discuss at length in an article I co-published with Armando Valenzuela Gomez in Economic Anthropology. And Armando is Hachihuinic and from Mensäbäk. Mexican mestizaje, like most cases of mestizaje, really values the dead or dying native. This native is apparently safer and more amenable to the nationalist project. Living, resilient descendants demand rights and better living conditions like the Zapatistas have been doing since the 90s. Mexican nationalist assimilation is part of a logic of elimination. And it is in the context of ongoing colonialism and elimination that I collaborate with Hachihuinic in Chiapas, Mexico. Together, we work to address issues of economic marginalization, dispossession, and erasure. Some of this work has been published in the Economic Anthropology article I already mentioned, and in the Mayanist article that was referenced in the September issue of the Aztlander. And I'll discuss some of that and other work that I've done in Mensäbäk, including the implementation of a consent process for aerial lidar. The Mensäbäk region is home to about 200 Hachihuinic and Tzeltal Mayas and is part of the wider Mensäbäk UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And the protected areas are administered and protected by multiple federal agencies, with the Maya residents of Puerto Bello Mensäbäk for short, forming the on-the-ground stewards of the biosphere. And within this context of indigenous stewardship, members of the Mensäbäk Archaeological Project initiated a program of collaborative investigation. So all investigations are conducted with the permission of the Mensäbäk community government, and locals comprise a majority of the field crew. The people of Mensäbäk fulfill many roles on the project, including supervisors, excavators, mappers, and laboratory personnel. And this work is intersectional because the men, women, Maya, and non-Maya work together to complete research. And over time, and via their continuing requests, local women have increasingly become a part of the archaeological process in Mensäbäk. And to address some of the economic issues I discussed earlier, the Mensäbäk Archaeological Project provides a temporary stream of income and builds local capacity in transferable skills, such as total station and GPS mapping, methods of controlled survey, and archaeological consolidation. In the process, we fulfill local requests to share knowledge that can aid local Mayas in their stewardship of the biosphere, as well as provide expertise that youth in the community can use to enter Mexican universities. The aim is to build relationships and research based on reciprocity. Building from this collaborative ethos, in 2018, I initiated a field project that focused on generating economic growth via community-based and sustainable tourism. This work also aimed to promote Hachihuinic as stewards of archaeological heritage because they've already been caring for ancestral remains for generations. According to Hachihuinic relational cosmology, skeletal remains in ancient buildings have power and require respect, which is why there is relatively little evidence of looting in Mensäbäk. The archaeological record is part of a broader conception of the world referred to as the forest. Everything, including cities and areas of human habitation, are part of a forest. Accordingly, Hachihuinic will care for the archaeological record as they do the rainforest. Yet, protecting the rainforest is made difficult by the economic marginalization that many community members face. And in this vein, my colleague Armando argues that if our community, Mensäbäk, can generate turismo consciente or a conscious tourism that entails a steady stream of visitors, perhaps 10 to 20 per week, we would see a significant economic benefit for everyone in Mensäbäk because visitors would hire local guides and we hope, stay overnight in one of the many tourist lodgings available in town. Economic vitality is important for maintaining the community and forest because few are finding work and many are leaving for other places, including the United States. As the community separates because of economic forces, we become weaker in our ability to protect the forest. So what many locals really want from archaeologists is assistance in the creation of sites for tourism. Haçwinik are fully aware of the income generated by archaeological and cultural heritage tourism in Palenque, the Maya Riviera, and other parts of Mexico. But in comparison, Mensäbäk currently receives a small number of visitors and not enough for anyone in the community to make a decent living. And it took me years to sign on to this community-driven heritage project because of the issues of nationalist control and racism inherent to the Mexican tourism industry. For example, many people, including politicians like the former president that you see on the screen, Felipe Calderon, visit Haçwinik communities because they are viewed as one of, if not the most indigenous of Mexico's ethnic groups. And these outsider perceptions of indigenous authenticity hinge on Eurocentric notions of tradition and stasis. As is encapsulated in the quote that you see on the screen by Philip and Mary Baer, who were key mid-20th century scholars of Haçwinik culture. So they state, the anachronism of the Lacandones in our modern world continues to attract the attention of the adventurer and romantic who returns from the jungle with awesome tales of ancient ritual and mystery. Indigenous authenticity in this sense is defined in contrast to being modern or Western. I've seen many visitors in Mensäbäk walk past dozens of Haçwinik and become really excited when they find someone wearing a white robe. A sense of glee comes over their face because apparently they have found one of the last remaining Haçwinik. But this racist view of indigenous authenticity and loss contributes to the Mexican logic of elimination. So in Mensäbäk, we decided to try something different. We aim to craft a narrative about the Haçwinik that acknowledges their active, dynamic lives and stewardship of the archaeological record. As part of a pilot project, we selected a pre-colonial fortification at the site of Tsibatna for excavation and consolidation. By consolidation, I mean investigating architecture in order to learn about the past and prepare structures for presentation to tourists. And Mensäbäk community members had long expressed interest in consolidating Tsibatna's archaeological remains because they already took tourists to see sacred caves and rock art at the site. Moreover, Tsibatna is less than a kilometer from Mensäbäk and easily accessible via a 20-minute ride in a rowboat. So in June 2018, we consolidated a small fortification to build local capacity and test the feasibility of scaling up this kind of work in Mensäbäk. And community members learned about the federal regulations for consolidating archaeological structures, including, what's the right type of soil and materials needed to create a bonding agent for the stones. They also went through the headache of dismantling and then piecing back together a collapsed wall. In addition to providing community members with a temporary stream of income, I worked with local guides to rethink some of the historical and cultural narrative they provide on their tours around Mensäbäk. Haçwinik have always discussed their culture and history while taking tourists to visit cave shrines and other ancestral sites in the Mensäbäk region. But because of our collaboration, they now also discuss the work they've done as archaeologists. For example, discussions of Haçwinik deities that live in archaeological sites will be paired with interpretations of artifacts that they personally excavated and interpretations of daily life at those same cities or at those same sites. As part of the ongoing effort to foster tourism in Mensäbäk, the guides that I worked with have uploaded photos of their consolidation work and local stewardship practices onto their Facebook page, Ecoturismo Mensäbäk. And if you want to go see the page, it's active. Just go on Facebook and type in @ecoturismo.mensäbäk. You can see it on the screen. And the page currently has over 3,000 followers. And several of those followers have visited Mensäbäk and posted pictures of their visits. In addition to attracting tourists, the Facebook page provides an opportunity for Mensäbäk community members to demonstrate that they have the proper knowledge and skills to create a sustainable future for their community and the surrounding forest. For example, the image you see is from a post on how local tour guides and the operator of a small diner attended a forum on sustainable tourism. Via social media, the Maya of Mensäbäk have found a means to generate tourism and assert their presence in the Mexican heritage industry. And to provide a brief update on this work, in the summer of 2023, I returned to Chiapas in Mensäbäk and found that despite the crash in tourism that resulted from the pandemic, Mensäbäk community members had maintained the consolidated wall. And now the hope is that visitor numbers will climb as the tourist industry continues to recover from the pandemic. So by presenting themselves as active participants in the tourism industry and stewardship and their stewardship of archaeological remains, the aim is to combat racist notions of Hachiwini timelessness or anachronism. The perceived timelessness or traditional lives of the Hachiwini can be a lure for tourists to visit Mensäbäk, but once in the community or on social media, local guides can attempt to change these perceptions. Via posts on Facebook or through locally guided tours, Hachiwini can demonstrate for outsiders how they are active participants in the modern world and stewards of their own heritage, which includes their homeland or rainforest. By highlighting Hachiwini stewardship, we're also combating Maya dispossession and nationalist elimination. And this brings me to the second part of my case study, which focuses on aerial lidar. So many of you have probably heard of or are familiar with lidar. Light detection and ranging, or lidar, is a laser scanning technology that can be used to create maps of archaeological sites. It does so by measuring the return time and intensity of light reflecting off surfaces. This very simple premise has led to the development of many different scanning technologies, including those currently available on some iPhones and prototypes of self-driving cars. If you're familiar with iPhone lidar, the scanners with archaeological applications, I mean, you can use an iPhone for scanning in archaeology, but it's not that great. We tend to use different ones that actually fire thousands and millions of laser pulses per second. And I speak from experience because I've worked with both terrestrial and aerial versions of lidar while doing archaeological research. And for today, I'm focused on aerial lidar, which are laser scanning systems mounted on airplanes, helicopters, and increasingly drones. And many researchers have called aerial lidar a revolution in archaeological practice. The reason for this is that aerial lidar affords archaeologists the ability to map vast areas of the ground surface with high accuracy, at times centimeter accuracy. And it can do so in areas with tree cover. For example, in the Petén rainforest of Guatemala, a team of researchers were able to map 95,000 square kilometers in a matter of weeks. I couldn't do that in a lifetime with traditional methods, meaning total station, tape and compass, what have you. So the information collected is so rich and complex that many archaeologists have turned to AI and machine learning for assistance in analyzing what amounts to big data. And the power to map vast areas with high accuracy, especially the ability to see beneath forest cover, has led many researchers to call for mapping the entire land surface of Earth with aerial lidar. Yet, in all the excitement and media coverage, there are important ethical issues that have gone largely unaddressed. Like I mentioned earlier, aerial forms of lidar are being used to create high-resolution scans of entire regions and sites. To do this type of research, you need national, but not necessarily local permission to do the aerial scan. So think here how Google can map your homes without permission. In the case of indigenous communities, we must consider another set of related issues. In Mexico and other countries as well, by only obtaining national or federal permission, researchers perpetuate the nationalist appropriation of land, culture, and heritage. In other words, mestizos get to decide when indigenous lands and ancestral remains can become data and how they should be governed and administered. And a pushback I've been asked is, do indigenous descendants even care that their land is being scanned remotely. After all, I mean, Google does this all the time. It's doing it right now, probably. And the answer to this question is yes, they do care. In peer-reviewed publications and other media outlets, Indigenous peoples from many parts of the globe have stated that they do not want their land, ancestors, and heritage to be studied without their consent. An excellent interview about this topic actually was just published this week or last week in Sapiens, an interview that Chip Colwell did with a Hopi tribal elder and leader. But returning to the specific case of Mexico, we must consider how aerial lidar, or really any form of remote sensing that is done without the consent of indigenous descendants, perpetuates dispossession and the Mexican logic of elimination. As I discussed earlier, mestizaje ultimately seeks to eliminate living indigenous descendants and really values the dead or dying native. And here we have a map derived from a LiDAR scan, and this one is from the project in Guatemala that I mentioned, but you can substitute pretty much any image based on a LiDAR scan in the Maya area or elsewhere. So what do you see? I mean, you can probably see topography. Some of you probably see the big ancient structure on the left, and maybe you see some waterways. But do we have any idea if contemporary Mayas live here? In this image, contemporary descendants are literally erased from the landscape, but their elimination runs even deeper. If a contemporary community does exist in the area that you see, do you think they were asked for permission or even know that an aerial LiDAR scan was made of their homes? The answer is no, in almost every case in Latin America. And you don't have to take my word on this. In a review of publications that involve aerial LiDAR research in Latin America, Cohn, Fernandez-Diaz, and Meeks conclude that it is unusual for a scanned region to be defined through consultation with communities living near archaeological sites, who may include indigenous or other descendant communities, and stakeholders using the land or for agriculture or other activities. So for all Latin America, Cohn and colleagues note only one exception to this trend, which is the work I'm about to discuss. So we on the Mensäbäk Archaeological Project had long been discussing plans to map the entire Mensäbäk portion of the Naha Mensäbäk UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is demarcated on the screen. And this area encompasses roughly 3,368 hectares. And while preparing for consolidation work at Sibana, I gained just such an opportunity to do a laser scan through the National Center for Airborne and Laser Mapping, NCALM for short. This is the team that has done most of the aerial LiDAR scans in the Maya area. And Fernandez-Diaz, who is an author in the article that I just mentioned, actually is one of the lead people at NCALM. He's like on most of the publications when it comes to LiDAR in the Maya area, because he was doing it. But before we did any kind of scan, I sought to gain the informed consent of Mensäbäk community members. Drawing from community-based methodologies and the city training program, I developed a plan to lead a community gathering that would discuss the fundamentals of aerial LiDAR mapping. Project founder Joe Palka joined me in this conversation as well. And via WhatsApp, we coordinated with the local community leader, referred to locally as comisario, and we set an October 2018 meeting. Once in Mensäbäk, we discussed with the comisario the ideas we wanted to present, and he agreed to call a community gathering on our behalf. The meeting was held in the Mensäbäk Community House, where official matters are typically presented for discussion by locals. For the formal part of the presentation, Palka and I created PowerPoint slides to facilitate discussion of past field seasons and future research plans, including the potential for conducting an aerial laser scan of Mensäbäk. The use of illustrations in place of text was important because many people in the community cannot or struggle to read. And the importance of engaging imagery was stressed by local colleagues who warned us that too much text would alienate community members. And the meeting involved explanations of how LiDAR technology works and how it can be mounted on an airplane to map the entire Mensäbäk protected area. Next, we covered the reasons why this method of data collection could be useful for creating topographic, archaeological, and forestry maps for the community and for future researchers. We also discussed how the collected data would be managed, including the Mexican federal requirements for data sharing and dissemination. Numerous times in during the presentation, we stated that anyone could stop us if they had questions, but the formal part of the presentation was less conversational than we hoped. Nevertheless, the informal question and answer did lead to a lively conversation. During the question and answer, we covered a range of topics, including further consideration of how doing an aerial lidar scan of Mensäbäk could generate potential benefits for the community. After some discussion that was a mix of Spanish and Achtan, or Lacanton Mayan, we asked locals for their permission to map the entire biosphere. And the community leader and other heads of the community agreed to allow the mapping project. Many expressed that they could see the benefits for researchers as well as their community. A phrase we commonly heard was that it would be nice to have a record of the community. In other words, many saw the LiDAR as providing a snapshot of the town and protected areas that could be passed down to future generations. Many also anticipated potential economic benefits. The aerial LiDAR survey will provide locals with a better map for tourists that also displays information about local businesses. Consequently, I'm working with locals to process the data and create regional maps. The processing of the aerial LiDAR data will be ongoing for many years, but future plans for research include a deeper engagement with locals in the process of geospatial analysis. In addition to formally providing the community of Mensäbäk with full copies of the data, I've partnered with two locals, Armando Valenzuela Gomez, the guy I co-authored with, and I've also partnered with Chanquin Valenzuela Gomez, who are working with colleagues to process the point clouds for their own projects. Hopefully, their work can provide inspiration for other members of the community to develop skills in geospatial analysis that will benefit future generations. And fully realizing this type of collaboration will require computers that can be left in Mensäbäk with sufficient processing power to work with LiDAR datasets. And while continuing to process the LiDAR, I'm partnering with Armando and Chanquin to create locally relevant regional maps. So working in the community for many, many years has taught me that they have their own mental maps and their own forms of cartography that maybe one day we can pair with the LiDAR maps. If locals decide that they don't want to do that, we will continue to promote their particular indigenous perspectives to address other issues such as poverty, tourism, and archaeological stewardship. So in sum, how archaeologists make history matters. By doing archaeology with Hachiwinik in Chiapas, Mexico, we on the Mensäbäk Archaeological Project combat nationalist appropriation along with indigenous dispossession and elimination. The Mexican nation-state claims ownership over the archaeological remains within its territorial boundaries. In so doing, it perpetuates a process of indigenous dispossession that was instituted during the colonial era. The multicultural ideology of mestizaje contributes to ongoing colonial oppression by providing a justification for the ultimate elimination of contemporary indigenous peoples. The Mayas, Nahuas, and other groups are supposed to eventually melt away into the mestizo multicultural melting pot so that only Mexicans remain. To combat these forces of oppression and the histories they inspire, I collaborate with Hachiwinik in the archaeological process. Not only have we sought to change the narrative of the traditional, static, and dying Hachiwinik, we've also proclaimed their stewardship and resilience in the contemporary world. And this effort has occurred via social media, peer-reviewed publications, and of course, this talk. By working together to consolidate a pre-colonial fortification or instituting consent practices in aerial LiDAR mapping, we are making history through community archaeology. And our work is shifting the perspective from which Hachiwinik history is told by making it less Eurocentric. In this vein, I'm working on a publication with several colleagues that applies Hachiwinik relational philosophy to the study of pre-colonial remains in Mensäbäk. So be on the lookout for that for this work in the coming year or so. In the end, by making history with indigenous peoples, we create a more equitable, inclusive, and dynamic archaeology that addresses pressing social issues. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Chris. You had a whole hour, hour and a half. You could have gone longer.
I know. But I felt like this was a lot of material, so I decided
Yeah.
to stick it here, and I felt maybe people would have a lot of questions. I saw there was a lot of comments at a certain point in the talk, so.
I don't see too many. Anybody want to unmute and ask Chris a question? Please do so. I don't see any questions in the chat except how you spell hash with Winnique.
Yeah, that would depend on well, on many different things. Normally it's Hachwinnik, but you ask the linguists and they like to use the J sometimes. So
Where do they put the J?
at the beginning of Hach.
Oh yeah. I
Mhm.
thought there was an L in there, like halash Winnique. No.
No, that's you could tech that like they have a Hachwinnik. That is, yeah, it's a word, but the Hachwinnik don't call themselves. They don't have that word Halach for referring to themselves, at least. Yeah, that's like stuff from the colonial era that I
Oh,
know of, but there are probably other contexts as well.
all right. And you're thanking me. Well, I thank you. Michael Ruggieri of the Aztlan list and my co-partner in all things Aztlanderous. He's in Paris right now. So he didn't have a chance to announce the program, beyond what I put in the in this month's issue. Uh, so we would usually have a lot more participants, but I guess a lot of people from the Aztlan list and stuff like that just didn't get the notice. But if any of you are members of the Pre-Columbian Society of Washington, D.C., uh, Judy, the Smoking Mirror e-newsletter editor, is announcing our Aztlander programs 2 months in advance now. So I'm not sure if she got September in there, but her recent edition is already announcing our October and November programs with links. Uh, so that you can get ahead of the game by that. So Joel Gunn saying for Chris, there's a new article on using multiple lidar areas to train a mass data analysis. Could be complicating character, Leela, Tim Beach, Takeshi Nomada, Thomas Garrison, a bunch of names. Look at the chat, and he provides a link. So I'm not sure what he's trying to say. Using multiple lidar areas to train a mass data analysis.
I don't see that in my chat. I actually see.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's to me as a direct message. Gosh, Joel, do you want to unmute and ask Chris? Um, Meanwhile, Carrie is asking, would you consider people interested in doing archaeological excavation attending one of your projects to learn how the process is done?
Uh, Yeah, absolutely. Not necessarily the Mensäbäk project, but I have other works. So because I'm at Loyola University Chicago, I'm training students currently, and a lot of what I talked about, collaborative methods, and doing the type of work that I discussed. So I'm actually working on starting a project in Illinois, in north of Chicago, about an hour in a place called Woodstock, where there is a pioneer settlement. There's other traces of archaeological remains on the campus that Loyola has up there, and there was a field school up there already. So in 2 years, we want to start it back up, but to do it with these type of community based methods and to do it collaboratively with Native American descendants. So trying to build partnerships with the Potawatomi, the Anishinaabe peoples, and other groups that I mentioned in my beginning of my talk. So that one, yeah, definitely if you want to come out and see any.
What I'm interested in, because I speak Spanish, I grew up in Latin America, is working on a project actually in Chiapas, if that was ever possible.
In what sort of capacity? Like as a
Rank
volunteer.
dinner, work in the dirt, do whatever you tell me to do kind of work.
Oh no, I asked because in Mexico there are more strict federal regulations in terms of like how archaeology is done. So in Mexico, if you're foreign, if you're not Mexican, you have to have at least a master's degrees to put a trowel on the ground. So with the Mensäbäk project, if you're not Mexican, that's why I don't necessarily recommend going to try and do the archaeology unless you already have a master's or you just want to help map. If mapping they allow, but the other components not so much.
I have a master's in linguistics, but not in archaeology.
Maybe. Yeah, I think we'd have to ask. I have to like when we submit our permit applications, I have to ask around. One of my colleagues, Josue Lozada Toledo, who helped me with this project, we worked together on the Mensäbäk project. He's part of INA. I could ask and see what he thinks. But yeah, I mean, the project is currently running. I didn't go this summer. I was actually in Copan, but the Mensäbäk project is currently running, and Joe Palka, the founder, was there just last month. So,
Uh-huh. Well, I'll just ask if I might keep in touch with you and see
I'll
how,
hook you two up. I'll send you each other's emails so you can continue from there.
yeah, that'd be great.
All righty. And Chris, what were you doing in Copan?
um, so more of thinking about basically applying these collaborative methods in Copan. So there's a site called Los Sapos, which is
Right.
a rock shrine with a toad and other types of figures on there. And so
Right.
I was working with my colleagues, Kristen Landau, Adelide Martinez Perdomo, and others to do 3D laser scan
Oh
of
yeah.
this arch to promote its conservation because it's deteriorating very rapidly over the last 100 years. You can see pictures from the early 20th century and what it looks like now, and it's just the details are eroding rapidly.
Right.
So we did a photo and laser scan of it, and then also applying these community archaeology methods, doing it in a way that collaborates with actual descendants. So we're going to Chorti Maya communities and talking to them about this project, asking them if that's okay with them, and what they would like to get out of it, and collaborating with them in the research design, talking about how to disseminate the data, if we should disseminate the data, and so forth. But you know, that's still like raw. I just finished that. Like I just stopped doing that project like a month ago, so we're still kind of
Wow. Yeah, I'm familiar with Los Sapos, and I've taken groups there. We stayed at the little hotel that's right there, walking distance away. It's not a hotel, it's like a
yeah.
place with rooms, and they have cooks that make you dinner. And I've done a presentation about the Maya there. And then we were some of the first to take Quiché Maya elders, and we did it up there on their land, overlooking Copan down below in the valley. But we were some of the first to take Maya elders and do ceremony at Copan. And then Los Sapos is connected with, they think it was connected with women and birthing and everything.
Yeah, that was the ethnographic component that we did. The common narrative is that yeah, it's tied to women and fertility and giving birth. So they said that a lot of women would go and give birth actually on the Sapo, and that the toad, I should say, and that women who couldn't become fertile or have children would go there to do a ritual and with the hope of conceiving children. Yeah, so that is a big association, but there's a lots of different um, things that are said about Los Sapos. We still have to go back and look at those notes and see what people said. But I remember hearing a lot about fertility, candy making, and other kinds of things going on.
Are you going to be there next year?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe it. It was a one-time project. I'll go back, I'm sure, to do other projects, Copan, but this one was to laser scan and then to help conserve the site. So my colleague Kristen Landau will be going back in December to look at the new fence and enclosed area that we started creating in August. So we worked with the local landowner and the Chorti that live nearby to talk about how we could fix the fence, and everyone agreed that we should expand the area that's protected now. So we did, and we're going to go see how that looks.
All right. Joel, did you want to ask your questions or comments to Chris directly?
Yeah, I was just passing that reference along, but I was thinking this this article is about using a half a dozen different lidar scanned areas to train a program to identify cultural features, and I was just thinking that might complicate the permissions thing a bit if if they applied that widely, because you would have in order if you wanted to do, say, all of the Guatemalan lowlands, to train this program, I guess you would have to have multiple permissions from multiple groups. It's just a thought.
I agree. I think a lot of people who are working with LiDAR don't want to talk about this, because when it comes to the realization of what's actually happening and what would it would entail to actually get consent and to stop just dispossessing and eliminating and ignoring indigenous peoples, it would slow everything down. You couldn't just scan all the areas that have been scanned and keep, collecting all this data and getting publications, because, just thinking about 95,000 square kilometers. Granted, that area isn't as densely populated as, like, let's say, Guatemala City or other parts of Guatemala, but to go in there and figure out who's on the ground, who are the descendants, and asking their permission one by one would take time. And I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's something that we need to do. Otherwise, we're just perpetuating these oppressive practices that I mentioned, elimination, dispossession, marginalization. And so, yeah, I agree. It asks a lot of us as archaeologists, but I think it's something that we need to do if we want to call ourselves the good guys. So, yeah, but I agree. It is going to be a bigger conversation that I think we are going to have if people are going to take seriously, what I've said and what others have said as well.
Oh,
Yeah, it looks to me like all of this our analysis is headed toward giving us an accurate estimate of classical period populations, which could be very important in understanding what went on with the rise and the fall of the classical period. So it would be an important activity to to subsume the whole Yucatan Peninsula under a program like that and get an accurate measure of what the population was.
Yeah, I would agree, but I wouldn't agree that that's more important than upholding indigenous rights and sovereignty and self-determination and combating the oppression they've been facing since Spanish colonialism. And I'm not saying those have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think that I think that your idea of getting permission is a good one. Just needs to there needs to be some, maybe you said something about there being a lidar being national and local in terms of permission. So maybe national authorities would have to agree on some kind of a consensus among the local groups or something.
Yeah, something would have to be figured out at the national, local level, international. Like, yeah, I agree. It implicates, like, because these researchers, MCOM isn't Mexican and they're working all over the world. So I would agree. It's like it has to be a coalition of different stakeholder groups, Mexican at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, including the US as well, kind of agreeing in terms of, like, how to move forward. Because, yeah, I agree. I think the findings that people are coming up with are interesting and relevant. People are talking about climate change and sustainability, but I think that shouldn't come at the cost of what contemporary indigenous peoples are facing and sort of their second class status in Mexico. So I agree. I think it's going to have to come at multiple levels, but I think more than anything we need to slow down. Everyone wants a lidar scan now. Nobody's really considering the impacts of this in Mexico or Guatemala. Some are, I shouldn't say nobody, but it's not really discussed. And I think like the conversation that you and I are having, I appreciate it because I think it's the ones that we need to have.
I have another question for you. Does you said that you were going to call the post-classic the pre-colonial, but I think we need, I don't think that the post-classic is what we need to be using, but I don't know whether pre-colonial is any better, because that still brings along the baggage of the colonial period. And I wonder if there's an indigenous word. Do they have an understanding of there being a post-classic period, and do they have a name for that?
The Hachwini, not necessarily. Yeah, they don't. Their history is referenced differently in terms of temporality, and but I agree. Pre-colonial was just for this talk because like you mentioned, I think many researchers have been saying this for many, many years, that like we have this culture historical system that was developed in the earliest 20th century that many of us don't like. The labels don't fit, not only in terms of social issues, but just the data that we have and what we know now. But there's like this inertia that we can't change it. And so I think for many different reasons, I put the pre-colonial there, and I agree. I don't think it's a great label. I wish I could have come up with something better. But I think it's also, like you said, it's something that a broader conversation that we need to have. And for the Hachwinik, that'd be interesting. I agree. I think it'd be interesting to work with my collaborators and see if we can come up with different names, different labels based on sort of how they view history, and perhaps talking about overlaps from that with archaeological timescales and so forth. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Ron Fournette was asking, did you encounter any pushback from Native communities?
In terms of like lidar and all this? No. The tourism project, that was them telling me to do it. I was the one pushing back for many years, being like, I don't know about that. That was all them. So that project was not seamless, but I had a lot of help and support and from people in Mensäbäk. And the lidar one, no, not really. The people were like, that's interesting. We need to think about it some more, learn about it. And once they did, they thought it was a very interesting project, and they saw how it'd be useful. And the only time I've ever gotten pushback in terms of archaeology, and it's something that I've respected, is that people in Mensäbäk don't want us studying and digging and excavating human remains, especially those in cave shrines. So that is sacred and important, and their ancestors, and they don't really want us analyzing them or excavating them. So that's the only kind of, I guess, real pushback you could say. But I wouldn't call it pushback. They just said, no, we don't want to do that. And to me, I was like, okay, that's fine. I don't want to dig bones anyway.
There's two folks that just entered, so they're an hour off. One is John Daigle, and also Diane Roos, and she just hit me up that she's in Chiapas, and she's figuring it would start at 7 p.m. their time, but she was an hour late. But Christine, do you want to vocalize your question for Chris?
Sure. Thank you, Chris, for your really important research. I just wanted to turn to social justice issues and was wondering what people talk to you about, and if they are concerned at all about cartel activity, paramilitary activity. I work in Highland Chiapas and Chenalo,
Mhm.
where that's an important issue, as well as it is throughout Chiapas. If you could just
Yeah.
talk.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had more to say.
No.
Yeah, no, the cartel activity has really shifted with the well now outgoing president. In just since the pandemic started and ended, the cartels are a little more of a concern, especially in the southern Lacandon rainforest, like in around Bonampak. There's these issues, but in Mensäbäk itself, people will say that there is more of this activity in Palenque and other parts of Chiapas, and they don't want it to affect tourism or to affect people moving in and out, because for them locally, um, it doesn't affect them as much. I mean, if there are drugs present and so on and so forth, that's just kind of a fact of life anywhere. But in terms of them being able to move and do stuff, no one has really expressed major kinds of concerns with like cartels coming into Mensäbäk or Naha and doing things. And even if they did, because it's a biosphere reserve, the military is always moving in and out of this area doing drills and stuff. So I think Mensäbäk is a little unique in that the state, Mexican federal government and the nation state itself is very invested in this area. Their president after president have come in and done stuff and taken pictures with the Hachiwinik. The current president, now outgoing, AMLO, specifically stated that he's a champion of the Selva Lacandona and the Hachiwinik and so forth. So for them, I think paramilitary activity, they know about it. They know, I mean, whenever I'm down there, I'm always hearing about what's happening in Chamula and other parts of Highland Chiapas and roadblocks and so on and so forth, but it's always out there in that area. And the only concerns, I guess, are when people from Highland Chiapas start to move into the rainforest, lands that are theirs, legally speaking. And so that can create issues. And so yeah, I think people would in Mensäbäk do mention, we wish it was less crime. We wish we had less issues with the cartels. But when it comes to that sort of social justice and the violence that people talk about, I think we're lucky, at least in this part of Chiapas and Mensäbäk and Palenque, that it's active, but it's not as visible and it's not as prevalent as other parts, like you mentioned in the highlands.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, is there anybody else who wants to unmute and ask a question?
I could ask something. Hey, Chris.
Hi.
I wonder, a lot of this discussion of, relations with the indigenous community doesn't make much sense for me for the work I do in central Mexico. I mean, community relations are important, but I wonder, what do you do if a bunch of local people disagree? What if you have factions and they're opposed as to what they want to do or how they would relate to the archaeology? And I certainly found that in Yautepec, and I wrote a little article about it, that I identified 16 different publics that were groups that had something to do with some stake in or interest in what we were doing archaeologically, and many of these groups were opposed. If we did one thing, helping out some group locally, then some other group gets mad. And how do you negotiate that kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, to me, the question is always what's at stake here. I mean, obviously we're archaeologists and we want to do archaeology, but like what's at stake in terms of the different stakeholders? Like for us, I mean, obviously our careers, but beyond that, like we presumably do it for a bigger reason, right? Not just to publish and make money. So what's at stake in terms of the research that we're doing? What's at stake in terms of the concerns of local people? Because in Copan, we just had this issue because La Pintada, one of the communities that we went to go work with, there's a lot of factional competition. There's one group, it depends what Chorti organization you're a part of. One doesn't like the other, and this one doesn't like that one. And then, of course, there's disputes with the landowner. And we had to navigate that. Now, we didn't have 16 per se stakeholder groups in the immediate area, but you could easily do that for Copan as well. And I think at least in our case, what we decided is that if our research is really unsupported by the Chortí, given their land struggles, given the disposition that's happened to them, that we just weren't going to do it. But beyond that, if they did approve it, we actually, when they said it was okay, different groups said it was okay. And what we did actually is we just became middle people, and we realized that actually, at least in our case, all these competing factions and people who were against one another actually wanted the same thing. They wanted more tourism to Los Sapos. They wanted the laser scan, and they wanted to amplify the space that was protected. And the Chortís, all of them could agree that they wanted people to have access to the site in order to sell their textiles and other goods and so on and so forth. And so to me, I think it slows things down. It makes you have to pause and deal with things that perhaps we're not comfortable as archaeologists, living people and their concerns. But, I think it has to sort of be more of a mediator role and trying to find common ground, understanding people's different perspectives and saying like, okay, what can we agree on? And then using that as a springboard for then doing archaeology. And if you can't find common ground, and there's nothing super relevant at stake beyond a theoretical question about like, I don't know, when did the Maya first arise? Because I don't think that question, unless you can show me an actual impact, it would have a positive impact for Maya peoples. I don't think that question is worth causing more conflict among like competing factions or, engaging in these things that I've mentioned of elimination, dispossession, so on and so forth. So it's always, I think to me, what's at stake here in terms of knowledge, what's at stake in terms of human rights, political economy, so on and so forth for living peoples. And if there's a lot of conflict, how can we mediate and find common ground? And if there is none, then we might have to just, not work.
All right, thank you, Chris. Can you stop your screen sharing?
Sure.
So people can see you larger? All right. So Carrie's got one last question. She understands now why you would not want to encourage excavation in the Lacandon area because they view that as interfering with the sacredness of their ancestors' cave shrines. How do you think the Lacandon feel about photography of the cave shrines by professional photographers wanting to help document them?
I have not encountered that, and I don't want to speak for Hachiwnik, but I will say this. When it comes to the cave shrines, lots of people have taken pictures, posted them online, and I haven't generally heard any kind of rumblings about that or people being upset. I mean, a tourism group that I work with put pictures of the cave, these ossuaries on their own Facebook page as well. So I don't imagine they'd have too much trouble. I mean, they always just want to know who's coming, like, what are you doing with it? Because they see themselves as protecting the rainforest and the archaeological record. So they just really want people to talk to them. And if you come to them honestly, truthfully, and look to, ask for consent, they usually say yes, except for like digging up bones. But pictures, I imagine, wouldn't be an issue. But, I don't want to speak on their behalf without having encountered this before.
All right. Well, does anybody else have a question for Chris?
So I just wanted to ask if we wanted to go support them with tourism, because I find them fascinating from the sacred point of view as well, studying Mayan spirituality. What should we, how should we, what town should we find them in? Should we go to Mensäbäk?
I think when it comes to understanding Hachiwnik lives and spirituality, I think you can no longer think of like site-based research. Obviously, as researchers, we have to pick a place, but Hachiwnik are transnational. I mean, they're, like I was mentioning in this talk, many have migrated out of the community. They've gone to Yucatan, they're in Tijuana, they're in Texas, they're all over the place. And so what Hachwinic spiritual view would look like and their cosmologies would look like are being shaped by all these different encounters. So in Mensäbäk, you'll get a certain perspective. Naha, you'll get another. In Lakangha, Chansayab, you'll get another one, and that's the site next to Bonampak. So I think it really depends on sort of what you're interested in and who's willing to sort of let you in, right? Who's willing to have that conversation with you. I mean, people in Mensäbäk are nice, but people are always following them around too, asking them questions about this and that. And I think sometimes they're like, oh no, the ethnographers are here, sort of thing. So, but I think Mensäbäk would be a nice place if that's something you want to investigate. But Naha too has a Antonio, who's a very learned person in terms of Hachwinic history and cosmology and knowledge.
Okay, I know we have some local contacts there. I was just hoping to find out about some, so I'll try to email you.
Okay. Yeah, Antonio, if you can talk to him, he's one of those elders that everyone agrees is very knowledgeable.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Chris. Chris, the other night, last Wednesday, the Institute of Maya Studies had a program with Brent Woodfield.
Yeah.
And one of my questions was, did he know you? And of course he did. He did a program about Sakbalam and community archaeology. But do you have anything to say about Brent?
I have a lot to say about Brent. Yeah, Brent's a great guy. He's been a good friend. And I mean, actually, I know a lot about that project because, yeah, at the SAAs, I always meet up with him and we've discussed the Sakpalam. And because what he's doing overlaps with a lot of what we're talking about and discussing and thinking about in Mensäbäk in terms of before the colonial period. And so, yeah, and actually a lot of my colleagues on the Mensäbäk project are working on the Sakbalam project. So Josue, the guy I mentioned, I collaborate with, he's on that project. Ruben Nunez Ocampo is on that project as well. So yeah, no, Brent's a great guy. And I think that's really interesting in terms of like what he's argued about finding Sakbalam. I don't know if I'm fully convinced, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Yeah, since I do the programming in both newsletters and I've been in touch with him coinciding with being in touch with you over the past 2 months. So that's it's been a Chiapas month. Alrighty, well, I don't see any more questions. So with that, Chris, I really, really thank you. And we'll get a lot more mileage out of the recording and go from there.
Thank you.
All right. And Michael Smith says, thanks for a great talk.
Yeah, thank you all for listening and for the questions. I appreciate it.
All right. And I'll post the recording in a couple of days or so, and I'll send it to you so you can share it with anybody.
Okay.
All right.
Good. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
And we'll go for here. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching this Aztlander video with Chris Hernández. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To subscribe to free monthly issues of the Aztlander, Magazine of the Americas, contact your host Jim Reed at mayaman@bellsouth.net. Thanks again.